My father left me a house in his will. But my mother stole it for her new family. My father left me his house in his will after he passed away. But my mom kicked me out so she could live there with her new family. 15 years later, I tried to take my house back. But they started threatening me. So, I went to the police. I'm 24 now, but let's start from the beginning. My mom kicked me out of my own house to impress her new husband. Well, if kick me out sounds too harsh, let's say she evicted me from my own home and forced me to live with my paternal grandparents. All my happy childhood memories are tied to the time when my dad was still alive. Sadly, he passed away when I was just 7. I felt hollow, empty. I was incredibly close to my father, and seeing him in the coffin for the last time shattered me. I still remember that moment vividly, and it still hurts. While I was trying to cope with his loss, my mom brought another man into our lives. She insisted I call him Dad. I thought, no way. Right or wrong, it just didn't feel right to me. Only a few months after my father's death, after our first meeting, I would often see this man in my mom's bedroom. It was hard for me to watch how quickly she moved on. She didn't even wait a year before bringing a replacement into our home. I was only 8 when they had their big, fancy wedding. Pretty extravagant, considering both were marrying for the second time, but it wasn't my business. She left me with my grandparents and went on a honeymoon. A month passed, and she never came back. I kept asking my grandparents when my mom would come get me, but they had no answer. Then, one day, she showed up. I was so happy to see her after so long, I ran to hug her. But she had brought all my belongings with her. That moment was heartbreaking, to say the least. I ended up living with my grandparents until high school. I was happy with them. Mom would visit me occasionally, only to say how much she loved and cared about me. Sometimes I'd ask her, "If you love me so much, why did you leave me here?" She never had an answer, just excuses. At one point, she finally admitted the real reason. She had given my room to her stepkids. Her new husband had 2 children, and after their wedding, they moved into our house. My mom placed her new family above me. Naturally, I resented her. Over time, I stopped trying to maintain contact. After high school, I moved out of my grandparents' place but visited often. They had raised me. They were my saviors. Without them, my childhood would have been completely destroyed. Fast forward to now, I'm 24. After a year working in marketing, I decided to start my own business. For that, I needed startup capital. And I decided to rent out my house. Oh, right, if I haven't mentioned before, here's a little surprise for my mom and her new family. The house they live in belongs to me. Yep. It's true. My father had prepared his will very carefully before he died and left me all his property, including the house. I was just a kid when his lawyer read the will at the funeral, but judging by my mom's face, she wasn't happy about it. Later, I learned she had tried several times to contest it, but failed each time. My father had made the will airtight. The house would be mine, but I couldn't sell it until I turned 21. Until then, nobody could claim ownership. My grandparents believe my father probably saw this coming, and that's why he made the will so strict. Otherwise, she could have manipulated me as a child into giving her the house. Last month, I called my mom to tell her about my plan to rent out the house, but she didn't answer. This week, when I visited my grandparents, I told them I was going to make some money from the house. They reacted strangely. When I asked why, they told me I might face serious resistance trying to get them out because my stepsister was pregnant and the father had bailed. On top of that, Bill, my stepdad, had lost his job and was now working night shifts at a store. In short, they were in bad shape financially. But I needed that house, too. I had quit my job, and I needed the startup capital to launch my business. My mother's smile was colder than the November rain. I hadn't seen my mother in person in nearly 10 years. Not once since I was a teenager had she bothered to show up for a birthday, holiday, or even just a quick visit. And now, I was about to knock on her door. My grandparents' warning still echoed in my head. She's not going to like what you're planning, and she's not going to make this easy. They were right. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people who live rent-free for years suddenly become experts in tenant rights the moment you ask them to leave. I drove up to the house of my house, and for a split second, I imagined what it would feel like to walk back in as the rightful owner. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, the fantasy shattered. The door opened, and there she was. She froze for a second, like she was trying to process who I was. Her eyes scanned me up and down, and then she plastered on this fake, stretched-out smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give a neighbor you don't like but still have to wave at. "Oh, it's you," she said, her voice flat. She hugged me reluctantly, like she was hugging a stranger at a funeral. Her arms were stiff, her hands barely touched my back. And here's the thing, after almost a decade of no contact, you'd think she'd at least say something like, "You've grown so much," or "How have you been?" Nothing. Not a single question about my life. Her body language screamed, "You're only here because you want something." Which, fine, I did. But it still stung to have her assume that right away. Then I saw her, Brenda. The pregnant stepsister I'd heard about from my grandparents. She was leaning in the hallway, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was a repo man coming to take her car. Her eyes were narrow, her chin slightly lifted in that I'm ready to argue position. In that moment, something inside me whispered, walk away. This is going to get ugly. And for a while, I listened. I told my mom I was just checking in since it had been so long. She nodded, offered no invitation to come in, and we stood in awkward silence. 5 minutes passed. It was clear I wasn't welcome. I left. But here's the thing about unresolved resentment, it doesn't fade, it ferments. And seeing my mom again, seeing the house, seeing Brenda, it stirred up every old wound. A week later, I decided to try again. This time, I had a reason. The 15th anniversary of my father's death was coming up. My grandparents were hosting a small prayer service at church, and I wanted to do something bigger in his honor, feed the poor, give gifts to underprivileged kids, gather friends and family to remember him. So, I sent my mom an email invite. She didn't reply. When I checked, I saw she hadn't even opened it. I thought maybe it went to her spam folder, so I decided to stop by in person. But when I knocked, she wasn't home. Brenda answered again. No hello. No how are you? Just. You're here again? What do you want? I told her I wanted to invite Mom to the memorial. She laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. Not a polite laugh. A full, mocking laugh right in my face. That was 100 years ago. Get over it. Something in me snapped. That's my father, I said. And it's not your place to comment. She rolled her eyes and walked away. I stood on the porch for a moment, feeling like I'd been slapped, then wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table for my mom. She called the next day. When I explained about the memorial, she said she couldn't make it because she had to take Brenda to a checkup. I felt a wave of disappointment. She could have at least said, I'll try. Instead, I said sarcastically. Of course, they're your priority. We're nothing to you. Good luck raising that narcissistic girl and her little spawn. That's when she lost it. She accused me of being just like my father, cold, unfeeling. And that was it. That was the match to the gasoline. I told her never to speak about my father like that again. She yelled. He's been dead for 15 years. Get over it. And I fired back. Yeah, like you did in a couple weeks. Maybe days. That night, I made my decision. This wasn't just about renting the house anymore. This was about taking back what was mine and ending the years of disrespect once and for all. I called a lawyer. The eviction process began. The eviction notice that shook the house. I've been told that in life, you should never deliver bad news in writing if you can do it in person. Well, that advice doesn't apply when the person on the receiving end is your mother, especially when she's had 15 years to convince herself your house is her house. My lawyer mailed the 30-day eviction notice. He worded it so clearly that even someone actively trying to misunderstand it couldn't. And yet, I knew exactly what was coming. The call came less than 48 hours later. Her voice was already at a boiling point before I even answered. I put her on speaker and sat back, letting her run through the greatest hits of narcissistic rage. First, she tried the Innocent Confusion Act. What is this? Some kind of joke? You can't just throw your own mother out of her home. Then, the victim monologue. Do you know what I've been through lately? Bill lost his job, Brenda's pregnant, and we can barely afford food. And now you're going to make us homeless? I didn't say a word. Silence, I've found, is like gasoline to her, it makes her rant hotter. Then came the guilt trip blitz. I raised you. I gave you life. And this is how you repay me? Over money? That was rich. I almost laughed out loud at the idea that she raised me, considering my grandparents did all the work while she played newlywed too. 0 in my father's house. When silence didn't work, she passed the phone to Brenda. And here's where it got theatrical. Brenda's voice was shaking like she was trying to make herself cry. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I'm pregnant. I'm carrying an innocent life inside me. How can you put a pregnant woman on the street? I swear, she said pregnant like it was some kind of diplomatic immunity. Like I should just say, oh, you're right. My bad, stay forever. I told her, as calmly as possible. Pregnancy doesn't give you a lifetime lease. That's when the tone shifted. The victim card got tossed aside, and out came the clause. You're pathetic. Your own father would be ashamed of you. No wonder your mom doesn't talk to you. I didn't take the bait. But I knew one person who would, my stepdad, Bill. And sure enough, a day later, my phone lit up with a voicemail from him. His voice was low, gravelly, the kind of tone men use when they want to sound intimidating but end up sounding like they're trying out for a bad crime drama. Listen, tough guy. You don't know who you're messing with. I could pick you up like a dumbbell and slam you into the ground. You show up here again, and I'll knock you out. One hit, you'll forget all about the house. He actually bragged about his size in the voicemail. And the best part? He just handed me solid evidence of a threat gift wrapped for the police. I saved it, sent it to my lawyer, and waited. We decided to let him dig his own grave before acting. Meanwhile, I focused on making sure every single step I took was 100% legal. No screaming matches. No surprise visits. No playing into their drama. But I knew one thing for certain. The eviction day was going to be a circus, and I was going to have front row seats. Eviction day, 3 hours to pack a lifetime of entitlement. The morning of eviction day felt almost unreal. For months, this house, my house, had been occupied by people who treated me like a stranger, or worse, an enemy. Now, the law was on my side. And I had the receipts, literally and figuratively. I didn't go alone. My lawyer came with me, briefcase in hand like we were walking into a high-stakes court scene. Behind us, a police cruiser rolled up. That sight alone was worth the stress of the last few weeks. Bill must have spotted me through the window, because before the officers even got out of the car, the front door slammed open. And there he was, wearing a torn sleeveless shirt, holding a hockey stick. I don't know if he thought this was the NHL playoffs or a medieval duel, but he was gripping it like it was a weapon. "Get off my property," he barked. The irony almost made me laugh. My property. He might as well have said, "Get out of my stolen car." The moment his eyes flicked past me and landed on the police officers, his bravado shrank by about 3 feet. He lowered the hockey stick, trying to play it off like he just happened to be holding it. The lead officer stepped forward, paperwork in hand. "Sir, this is an official eviction notice, verified by the court. You have to vacate the premises today." You could practically hear the air suck out of the room behind him, because yes, the whole little family was watching from the doorway. My mother stood with her arms crossed, jaw tight. Brenda hovered behind her, rubbing her pregnant belly like it was a shield. That's when the bargaining began. "Can't we have just one more month?" my mother asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Just until the baby comes?" I shook my head. "No. Not after all the threats." Bill tried to chime in. "You think you're being a big man? Throwing your own family out? That's cold." "Family?" I said. "You've known me for 15 years and never treated me like one. And let's be real, I'm not throwing you out. The law is." The officers stayed quiet, just watching the exchange. I could tell they were waiting to see if I'd budge. Spoiler alert, I didn't. Then Brenda stepped forward, hands dramatically resting on her stomach. Her voice was shaky, almost theatrical. "Please, you can't make me move right now. It's dangerous for the baby." That was the third time she'd used her pregnancy like it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I'd heard enough. "You have 3 hours, I said, glancing at my watch. "After that, anything left inside is going in a dumpster." You'd have thought I'd told them I was going to burn the house down with them inside. My mother's eyes went wide. Bill muttered something about me being heartless, and Brenda just froze, looking at me like I'd committed a crime against humanity. Bill tried to shoulder bump me on the way back into the house, but the officers were right there. "Pack up," one of them said firmly. "Now." I stood outside with my lawyer, listening to the sounds of chaos inside, drawers slamming, muffled swearing, footsteps pounding up and down the stairs. It was the sound of entitlement deflating. 3 hours later, they emerged. No hugs, no goodbyes. Just glares sharp enough to cut glass. They handed the keys over to the officer, who passed them to me. For the first time in 15 years, my hand closed around the key to my father's house, my house, without anyone else's name on it. They were out. But they weren't done with me. When the door finally shut behind them, and their footsteps faded down the driveway, I thought foolishly that this was over. They'd be gone, I'd changed the locks, and the only reminder of them would be the faint smell of Brenda's overcooked microwave meals lingering in the kitchen. But my lawyer had a different idea. "Given the threats," he said, "we should file for a restraining order. If they try to come back, even once, it becomes a police matter instantly." It was smart. Bill's little "I'll knock you out" voicemail and his hockey stick entrance were already plenty of evidence. Add in Brenda's harassment and my mom's attempts to guilt-trip me into giving up my legal rights, and we had a pattern. We filed the paperwork that same week. The police served them with a restraining order, explaining in very plain language that setting foot on the property again would result in immediate arrest. Their faces, my lawyer told me later, were priceless. The kind of expression people get when they realize the game really is over. But here's the thing about people like this, they don't just go away quietly. They circle, they poke, they test boundaries. They look for ways back in. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got my first sign. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been cleaning out the upstairs bedroom, my bedroom, from before my mom had handed it over to her stepkids, when I heard a car door slam outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw a familiar old beat-up sedan in the driveway. My heart sank. It was my mother's. At first, I thought maybe she didn't realize the restraining order applied immediately. But then I saw her pop the trunk and start hauling out boxes. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to move back in. I grabbed my phone and started recording from the window. She dragged the first box to the porch and started knocking. When I didn't open the door, she knocked louder, then started shouting my name. I texted my lawyer and called the police. When the patrol car pulled up, she went from yelling to crying in a split second. The officers reminded her about the restraining order and told her to leave immediately. Her tears dried up just as fast. She started screaming about a son who throws his own mother out and how she just needed a place to stay for a few days. The officers didn't budge. They walked her back to the car and told her to go or spend the night in jail. She left. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this wouldn't be the last attempt. The night the cameras proved me right. One thing my grandparents taught me. If you know someone's got a history of crossing lines, expect them to cross them again. That's why, right after the eviction, I had security cameras installed around the house, front porch, back door, driveway, even the side gate. Not cheap, but worth every penny for my peace of mind. And as it turns out, they paid for themselves sooner than I expected. It was late on a Friday night, maybe close to 11 p.m. I just finished going through a pile of my father's old documents, the kind that still smell faintly of his aftershave, when my phone buzzed. Motion detected, front door camera. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't ever expecting anyone at 11 p.m. I opened the live feed, and my stomach tightened instantly. There was Bill. Hood pulled up, hands in his pockets, glancing over his shoulder like a cartoon burglar. In one quick move, he stepped onto the porch and tried the door handle. It was locked, of course. But he didn't just leave. He leaned forward, peering through the window next to the door, cupping his hands around his face to block the light. Then he moved to the side, out of camera view. A second later, the back door camera pinged. I switched feeds, and there he was again, crouched low like he thought bending down would make him invisible. He pulled something from his pocket, looked like a screwdriver, and started fiddling with the door handle. That was it. I hit record, called the police, and told them we had an attempted break-in from someone under a restraining order. The dispatcher didn't even hesitate. Stay inside. Officers are on the way. From my upstairs window, I watched the patrol car pull up without sirens. 2 officers got out quietly and walked toward the back. Bill must not have heard them until the flashlight beam hit his back, because he shot up like someone had jabbed him with a cattle prod. The rest was almost too perfect. They cuffed him right there, walked him around to the front yard, and read him his rights under the glow of my porch light, all while my security camera caught every second. When they put him in the back of the car, he spotted me watching from the window. His eyes locked on mine, and I swear if looks could kill, I'd have dropped dead right there. But all I felt was this deep, satisfying calm. The next morning, my lawyer called. With the footage and the police report, Bill was facing charges for violating the restraining order and attempted unlawful entry. That meant, legally speaking, he'd be out of my life for a long while. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the game wasn't over. If anything, this was just going to make them angrier. The family dogpile. Bill's arrest should have been the nail in the coffin. Legally, it was. He couldn't come near my house without risking more charges. But socially? That's where my mom decided to make her move. It started the very next day. I woke up to 5 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. By noon, I'd gotten 2 voicemails from people I hadn't heard from since middle school. Uncles, cousins, family friends who were only friends with my parents, all saying the same thing in slightly different words. We heard you had Bill arrested. Is that true? Why are you doing this to your poor mother? Poor mother. That phrase kept repeating like a bad pop song. Apparently, my mom had been busy. Later that day, I found out how. A cousin sent me a screenshot of her Facebook post, a 500-word essay about how her ungrateful son had kicked her and her pregnant stepdaughter out into the streets and falsely accused her loving husband of breaking into a house that wasn't even his to begin with. The comments section was a goldmine of self-righteous outrage. What kind of son does that to his own mother? Blood is thicker than water, he should be ashamed. Karma will get him, just you watch. It was the kind of post designed to get sympathy from people who didn't know the actual story. And it worked. She had over 200 comments and a few dozen shares by the end of the day. But she didn't stop there. Oh no. That evening, Brenda decided to go public. She posted a crying selfie on Instagram, holding her baby bump, with a caption that read, "When your own stepbrother makes you homeless while you're pregnant. Broken heart." The post blew up in her small circle of friends. They flooded my DMs with messages calling me heartless, selfish, and my personal favorite, a baby hater. One person even messaged, "If anything happens to that baby because of the stress you've caused, it's on you." I didn't respond. Feeding trolls is like feeding stray cats, they just keep coming back. Instead, I sent every message, every screenshot, every voicemail to my lawyer. But here's where it got messy. Some of these calls weren't from random Facebook warriors. They were from family. People I'd sat next to at weddings. People who'd eaten at my grandparents' kitchen table. And they weren't asking what happened, they were telling me they'd already picked a side. She's still your mother. You need to make this right. Your father wouldn't want you fighting like this. That last one burned the most. Because my father, the man who made sure in his will that I would inherit the house, absolutely would have wanted me to fight for what was mine. He'd seen enough of my mom's selfishness while he was alive to know what would happen if I didn't. The smear campaign wasn't going to stop. If anything, I realized it was going to get worse before it got better. But the more they attacked, the more resolved I felt. The last card Brenda had to play. By the time Brenda tried her final stunt, She'd already burned through every sympathy tactic in the book. The crying selfies, the pregnancy pleas, the vague Facebook posts about heartless family, they'd all lost steam. But apparently, she had one more card up her sleeve. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my grandparents' kitchen, drinking coffee and going through rental applications for the house, when there was a knock at the door. Not a friendly knock. The kind of knock that makes your stomach clench. My grandmother opened it and froze. Standing there were two police officers and Brenda. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying, or had rubbed them raw to look like she'd been crying, and she pointed at me the second she saw me. "That's him," she said. "He's been harassing me." It took me a second to process what I was hearing. Harassing? I hadn't spoken to her since eviction day. I hadn't called, texted, emailed, nothing. The officers asked if we could step outside to talk. We did, and Brenda launched into this dramatic monologue about how I'd been sending threatening messages and showing up places she went to intimidate her. The thing is, she had no evidence. Not one screenshot. Not one witness. Nothing. She just assumed that if she sounded distressed enough, the officers would take her word over mine. Unfortunately for her, I had something she didn't: receipts. I told the officers I hadn't had any contact with her since the day of the eviction and that the restraining order applied to her, not me. Then I pulled out my phone and showed them my location history, messages, and call logs. Nothing. Not a single point of contact. But here's the kicker. While I was talking to the officers, my grandfather slipped into the living room and quietly pulled up the security camera feed from that morning. It showed Brenda following me from the driveway when I left the house to get the mail earlier that day. Clear as day, she was the one approaching me. The officers saw the footage. Their expressions shifted immediately. They turned to Brenda and asked, "Do you want to explain this?" Her face went pale. She stammered something about just wanting to talk and misunderstanding the restraining order. The officers weren't buying it. They warned her that making a false police report was a crime and that she should leave immediately before she made things worse. She left in silence. No tears, no last glare, nothing. It was the first time I'd ever seen her without some kind of performance. When the door shut behind her, my grandmother said what we were all thinking. "She's run out of moves. It's over." But my lawyer was less optimistic. "She's out of legal moves," he said. "That doesn't mean she won't find another way to stir trouble. And people like this, they rarely let go without taking one last shot." The letter that put the nail in the coffin. For a few weeks after the Brenda stunt, things went quiet. Too quiet. No late-night knocks on the door. No mysterious cars parked across the street. No social media meltdowns from my mom. I almost let myself believe it was over. But then the letter came. It was in an official-looking envelope, the kind that makes your brain immediately go into what now mode. The return address was a law office I didn't recognize. I opened it at the kitchen table with my grandparents watching, because frankly, I was done keeping any of this from them. The letter was from a lawyer representing my mother. She was threatening to file a lawsuit against me for emotional distress caused by the eviction. The wording was laughable. It claimed I had deliberately inflicted hardship on her and her dependent family members, and that my reckless disregard for her situation had caused severe mental suffering. I read the whole thing twice, then looked up at my grandparents. Grandpa snorted. Grandma just shook her head like she'd seen this play before. But here's the thing: even though my lawyer assured me it was baseless, I knew exactly what this meant. She wasn't going to stop until she either got the house back or made me regret fighting for it. And that's when the decision crystallized in my mind. I'd been planning to rent the house out, to keep it as a long-term investment. But now it wasn't about the money. It was about making sure she could never set foot in it again. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to list the house for sale. Not in 6 months. Not after I found the right tenant. Now. As soon as the paperwork could be filed. We both knew that selling it would close the door forever. Once it was out of my name, she couldn't touch it. There'd be no "well, technically it's still family property" argument. It would be gone from her life permanently. The moment I hung up, I felt lighter. Angrier, yes, but lighter. Like the decision had broken the last chain holding me to her. But there was still one more thing I had to do before the sale went through. And it would be the final nail in the coffin between us. The last time I ever saw my mother. The house was nearly empty when I called her. No furniture, no photos, no signs of the life she'd built here at my expense. It was the quietest it had been in 15 years, and I wanted her to see it that way. When she picked up the phone, her voice was sharp. "What do you want?" "I'm selling the house," I said plainly. "And I want you to come see it before it's gone. This is your last chance to step inside." There was a pause. She must have thought it was some kind of olive branch. It wasn't. She agreed to come that afternoon. I waited in the living room, leaning against the wall where my dad's bookshelf used to be. When she walked in, she stopped cold. Everything was bare. The echo of her footsteps seemed to make the emptiness louder. She turned to me, eyebrows knitting together. "Why are you doing this?" This is our family home. No, I said, my voice steady. It's my home. My father made sure of that, and you spent 15 years pretending it wasn't true. You kicked me out so you could play happy family with Bill and his kids. You never asked how I was. You never showed up for me. And when you finally had to face me, all you did was manipulate, threaten, and lie. Her jaw tightened. You're rewriting history. I did what I had to do. I laughed, short, bitter. No. You did what you wanted to do. And now you're facing what you've been avoiding since Dad died, the fact that you don't own a single piece of this place. She started to speak again, but I cut her off. You lost it the day you decided I was disposable. This house is the last thing tying me to you. Once it's gone, you can't use it as leverage, as a weapon, or as a stage to play the victim. And that's why I'm selling it. Her eyes flashed, and for a moment I thought she might explode. Instead, she looked around the room one last time, then back at me. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said. But at least I'll regret it in peace. She left without another word. The sound of the door closing behind her was final. I stood there for a while, taking in the silence, before locking it for the last time. 2 weeks later, the sale closed. The money hit my account. And just like that, the house, the battlefield of my childhood, my father's last gift to me, and my mother's constant obsession was out of our lives forever. I never heard from her again. Not a call. Not a letter. Not a knock on the door. And honestly, that's the happiest ending I could have asked for. White heavy checkmark final outcome. Mom, out of my life. Bill, criminal record from the break-in attempt. Brenda, lost her permanent home card. Me, startup capital for my business, peace of mind, and a clean break from 15 years of toxicity. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that sometimes blood isn't thicker than water, and the best way to protect your future is to cut out the people poisoning your present.